Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies, a program that's about things that are not always in the mainstream. But tonight we're going to get more into the mainstream than we've ever been. We have two special people on the show tonight. One is a special co-host, and I'd like to introduce her, Glenda Ann Sinclair, who is coming to us from Houghton Lake, Michigan. Is it snowing there, Glenda?
Yes, about 3 inches at this point.
Oh my gosh, I'm glad you're where you're at. Anyway, Glenda and I have a long-term relationship, and I thought she would be somebody to offer some interesting perspectives on tonight's conversation. The other person I want to introduce is our guest, and I have a history with our guest, Dr. Keith Anderson. We both worked for a time at Boise State University in Boise, Idaho, and something called the Educational Talent Search Program. And I think Keith just retired from there, so he's kind of footloose and fancy free. That's good. It's good to be retired. Anyway, Keith, I want to welcome you to the program. Things going okay in Boise?
Things going okay in Boise. I'm like you said, I'm doing the retirement thing. I don't think I'm doing it well yet. Everybody tells me it takes a little time to get used to, so
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
I guess that my question would be, how do you know whether you're doing it well or not? So,
Uh, Sometimes I'm bored, and
yeah, there you go.
it's you got to replace a lot of time. I mean, for me, it's like okay, I don't have to get up and drive. If you remember, I had Wilder and Parma high schools,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's a 50-minute drive one way. So I had uh, you know 2 hours basically a day in the car, and now I don't have that. So it's like, oh, okay, what do I do? And plus, not to mention the work. I mean, I was at work all day. And so it's not anything anybody else hasn't gone through. I just haven't learned to do it well yet.
Well, and one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is you've talked about doing the podcast. So maybe that will fill up a little bit of your time. So we want to talk about racism, and you have written about racism. How many books have you written on racism?
Well, on racism, I've written one book on racism, but the other two books I wrote, one of them is a football book, and one of them is a baseball book, deals with racism. They're not
Okay.
about racism, but there's racism in it. The baseball book is sort of like that that old movie Sandlot,
Oh yeah, okay.
but it's a story about a group of white kids and a group of black kids who love baseball, and they just want to play baseball, and the parents get involved, and the kids have to teach the parents a lesson about racism. That's the baseball one. And the football one is, again, it's about football, but there's elements of racism that you deal with on a football team. And those two books have something to do with racism. The third book is called From Racist to Non-Racist to Anti-Racist, Becoming Part of the Solution. That one's about moving from a non-racist person to an anti-racist person. So
And
that's definitely about racism.
that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight, that book in particular. But just to plug your books, where can people buy your books?
You can get them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, online. They're all there. You can go to my website and order it from there. The website is www.theantiracismcenter.net, and they're all there along with music that I've written and poems and things like that.
And you're a musician too, but
To say this, though, I want to shout out here for a second. I really like your music and poems, Keith.
okay.
Thank
I
you.
got an opportunity to hear some of it, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Glenda's a fan. So maybe an obvious question. Why be concerned about racism? Why write books about it?
It's the final book I wrote is actually my dissertation, and my dissertation is entitled teacher communication with students from diverse backgrounds. So it has a little bit to do with racism. But in the front of my dissertation, there's a quote that I use in life. God did not put me on this planet to become rich, but whispered in me the desire to enrich. And
Really?
so I can't help myself. This is what I do. Every time I try to walk away from it, I end up back. So I just learned to just stay there and don't waste a whole lot of time. Because sometimes you just feel like, no, this is never going to be fixed. Why am I wasting my time? And I have my little, I don't call them pity parties. I call them pity gala affairs because I have to go through it. And so, but I've learned to not stay there very long because this is who I am. People are made to do certain things in life. Apparently, this is mine.
Now, I mentioned that you live in Idaho, Boise, Idaho, which is where Glenda and I are used to be from. We both grew up in Mountain Home, Idaho, just down the road from Boise. So, what is it like being, and as I recall, 1% of the population of Idaho is African American? Is that an accurate statistic?
Yeah, that's the statistic,
Yeah.
and you know, it is what it is.
So talk to me about being African American in Idaho, the things you've had to deal with.
Well, you know, it's not what people think because I was able to use being here. You can't hide anywhere. So actually, being here with so many people who are European American white, I've had to deal with being black more than if I was living back home in California, where I'm from, where I have communities of black people, brown people, people of different uh, ethnic groups and skin colors that I can go and hide. And here, I have to deal with things on a daily basis, and I've had to learn, especially when you're talking about dealing with racism. I had to learn how to present my information without turning people off before they hear it.
Mm.
And so it's been a growing experience. Not that it's been a fun experience by any stretch of the imagination, but it's been a growing experience and it helps me do what I do.
Yeah, I imagine it's been a painful experience. In some respects, Glenda and I were talking about the first time, and like I said, we went to Mountain Home High School many thousands of years ago, hasn't been that long. But were talking about when was the first time we met a fellow student that was African American. And I'm pretty sure I was in high school, which would have been my sophomore year of high school before I encountered any student that was African American. And Glenda, what was your
It was
experience?
the same thing for me too, Steve. Yeah, it was the same thing. And I remember, I believe there were three at one point, and I remember two of them very well. In fact, this is something I wanted to bring up with you and ask you a question, Keith. When I was in high school, there were two that I adored. Um, we had a lot of fun together. One I had incredible respect for because she was always my competition. So, I felt I didn't feel anything different. She was just one of us. And that's how I felt about it. Now, whether she felt that way, I can't tell you. I can only tell you what I felt in high school. And that's been a long time ago. But a few years later, I actually left and went to school down in Texas, and I came back and I went up to the University of Idaho, and I was working in the registrar's office. And there was a young woman my age that was African American, and she had a chip on her shoulder, and she felt she was entitled, and she was very difficult to work with and not a very good worker. And it was so hard for me because one side of my brain's going, I don't want her to think that I'm racist because I don't feel that way. On the other side of my brain, I'm going, I don't like this person. I really don't want to deal with them. How do you deal with that kind of a situation without being perceived as racist when there was nothing about racism in that? It had to do with her personality and her lack of work ethic.
I don't know how everyone deals with it. I know if you're talking about talking to individuals, you treat individuals as individuals. And if it doesn't matter what color skin they have, that's my number one thing. I'm always honest with people. And I think it comes out that they can tell, well, he either likes me or he doesn't like me based on how I am treating him, okay, or how I'm talking to him, or whatever the situation may be. And I think a lot of times people put too much pressure on themselves, especially white folks, put too much pressure on themselves to be, um, I don't want to say politically correct because that's sort of cliche. Is that the word? I want to say I had to learn not to do that here in Idaho. I had to learn not to be so careful that I give the illusion that I'm being careful because I'm trying too hard not to have a chip on my shoulder. I'm trying too hard to mix in or whatever the case may be. And the only thing I found, and I don't know if this is answering your question, is I just be me. And I deal with people on that level. If somebody is being a jerk, they're not doing their job, whatever the case may be, I let them know that from that perspective. And I don't want you to carry around the thing that every time you talk to somebody that's a different color, that you have to worry about that. And that's I don't think that's I don't think that's healthy. I think you
I
have to
agree with you.
deal I think you have to deal with people, and I don't think it's healthy. In fact, that's what people are doing to this country right now to make people feel bad. It's making you, you don't have all that pressure. It's not real. It's not there. It's something that people put on you to make you feel a certain way. And it happens to all of us in some way, shape, or form. Somebody's trying to make us feel something that we may initially start feeling that, but if we just were who we are, and if a person is a racist, you'll find out. If a person isn't a jerk, you'll soon find out. But I try to be who I am. And Dan will tell you this, working with kids, you can't hide any of that. Because
Yeah,
they'll smell it out in a second.
tell us,
Okay. And so
tell,
that's what was good about working with kids, is that I had to learn to work with all these kids. I'm over in Horseshoe Bend. I'm the only Black person in town. Okay. In Parma, Wilder, there are people of color, and it's 90 something percent Hispanic students. Okay. But I had to learn to deal with that culture too. And the only way I knew to do it was, I'm just going to tell them what I truly feel. And if you talk to any of those students, I did that for 26 years. You talk to any of those students, and they'll tell you he was always honest with us. And it was weird because I have seen teachers go ballistic. Why do you talk with him like that and you won't talk with me like that? And I just look at him and I just go, you know, and so that's a long explanation, and I don't know if I ever answered your question, but
You did. And just so that you're aware too, I had the opportunity, and I really do believe it is an opportunity, to teach high school math late in life and down in Galveston, Texas. And that was such a reverse, because down there it was 40% African American, 40% Hispanic, basically, and 20% white. So it was turned. And walking in as a white teacher into that environment and not being 100% prepared for it was a little on the terrifying side of it, and probably the greatest treasure of my life. So, because if you have the true heart of a teacher, and it's one thing I kind of read a little bit of your book and I took a little bit of exception to, is I said, I don't think that many teachers are as far up as you think, because most of them have the right heart. They may not have all the training, but they have the right heart. And I know for me, I did an awful lot of looking to other fellow teachers that could help me navigate, so that I walked out with kids feeling like they were all equal, and that I believed in every single one of them. So I think that's an important piece for me when I was reading everything you were reading. And I said, I think a lot of everything you said, I totally agree with. And of course, I have the opposite issue. I have sexism that I have to contend with as a woman. So
Mhm.
I
Well,
kind of
I think
understand some of the ism piece of it.
I think one of the things that I've learned is that there is a difference between I've met teachers who seek out ways to bridge that communication gap. Okay, no matter where they're at, the goal is I have a saying in my dissertation, and it's not mine, but I say you gotta reach them to teach them.
Right.
And if your communication can't, I don't care how smart you are, I don't care what your knowledge is. If you can't take that knowledge from your brain and insert it into a student's brain, then you sort of fail. And I know there are more teachers who want to succeed, but I guess in my book I try to say that there's no percentage that's too small that isn't harmful. Okay, so even if there's only 10% of teachers who aren't, that's still 10% too many, because how many students get lost, even if there's only 10% of teachers not reaching students of different ethnic group or different income level? In fact, to me, being here in Idaho, it wasn't really the white students that I had a problem with. It was the poor students I had a problem with. And they could be white, red,
See
yellow,
that.
brown. Okay. It was the income had a lot more in my own professional career and what I had to deal with. It was the money that the low income students who their parents told them, you're never going to be this and you're never going to be that, and the reason you don't have this is because that black guy over there has it. And you wouldn't believe the things when I sat down with a student and talked to them, the things they told me their parents told them. And my job, and I taken on this pressure, is I know that I may be the only black person that a lot of these students meet until they're adults and they leave here, or somehow we get more people of color in Idaho. I could be it. So I have to do things and say things to not make the next person that they meet automatically a bad person. And so it's a tough uh, cross to bear, but I chose, well, it chose me or I chose it. I don't know which it is, but that's mine. That's what I do. And so it's um, yeah, that while I've dealt with a lot of racist issues over the years, I had to learn to deal with low income mentality.
Mhm.
So
I
Keith,
understand that. I understand that because I had an awful lot of that as well.
why don't you just
Okay,
shoot?
Dan, all yours.
Oh, no, I
What's that?
appreciate your question. Keith, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what we did at Boise State? Because I think they may not understand the special role that talent search played in people's lives. If you wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit.
Okay, well, Dan and I work for an organization called Trio, and we were one of the Trio, three different programs, and we worked for the program Educational Talent Search. And Educational Talent Search is a government-funded program, and we were housed on the Boise State campus. And our job was to help low-income, first-generation students get to college. And we didn't recruit for Boise State. We didn't recruit for any one specific college. Our job was to get them to college. And so we went out to their schools and we had cooperation. They had to sign applications to get into it. They had to be low income. Their parents could not have graduated from a 4-year college, and then they were in the program. And we took them on field trips, a lot of overnight field trips to colleges. We did a lot of daytime field trips to local colleges around here, but we would take them. Well, they went as far away as Harvard and Yale and uh, back east on one field trip where that one we only were able to take about 15 students. On other field trips that are like overnight, but they're within the states that touch Idaho, We go on 2 or 3 day field trips, and we'll take up to 70, 80, 90 students on 2 or 3 tour buses. And that means staying in hotels. We pay for their food. They never had to pay for anything in this program. And so it was all free. And again, it's that low income mentality because they didn't even believe, their parents didn't believe it was free. They thought at some point we are going to ask them for some money, and we never did. And they got to stay in hotels. They got to ride at really nice buses with video screens every 5 or 6 rows, so we watch movies on the way to certain locations. So that's what the program was about, and helping kids understand that they can go to college, and here's how you do it. We showed them how to get scholarships. We taught them the importance of doing well in school. We taught them the importance of thinking about your dreams. And so that's basically what we did. We were helping them realize that they too can do certain things, and we were the program that could help them. And that's what Dan and I did. That's what we did at our program.
So we impacted
Awesome program.
low income students, but we also impacted a lot of students of color because there was a correlation between being low income and being a student of color too.
And I was fortunate because I had 3 different levels. One of my schools was 99% white, low income. You had to have, I think you had to have over 50% low income students to be eligible for our program, a school, be a needy program or a needy school, I should say. So I had that one school that was 90 something percent white. I had one school that was 90 something percent Hispanic. And then I had a school that was about 65, 70% white and 30 to 35% Hispanic. So they were a mixture. And then there were sprinkled in there students that were Black at Parma and Wilder. I don't think I ever had a Black student at Horseshoe Bend. I could be just forgetting, but I don't think so. But they all taught me things. The schools that I was at, they all taught me certain things, and having to learn to have your head on a swivel when it comes to, I'm dealing with 3 distinctive races of people. And again, the low income mentality, I'm dealing with all of that, and you have to learn to do that. And that's where I get frustrated with society, because we have to learn to do things different if we want things to be different. We can't just say we want things to be different. You have to learn a new way of life sometimes, how to deal with people. And that's what my book is about. This is how you learn to deal with people, give people respect, and we can start ridding ourselves of some of the problems.
So how would you how does somebody become a racist? How do you know if you're a racist, if you're able to do any kind of self-reflection on that, or what are the characteristics of racists?
Well, I mean, there's the type of racism. We got the overt and covert racism, and we have people who go out of their way to do the overt racism. You know, they like calling people names, whatever the person may be, or they use derogatory terms to do it, or institutional racism where you don't get to advance very much. I dealt with that a lot at Boise State, having a PhD and all these other things. It was like it didn't mean anything. In fact, I had someone tell me it's no big deal that you have a PhD, and I'm like, whoa, okay. And so so you got the covert and the overt racism, and the overt racism is easier to deal with, even though it may be more violent than covert, because covert exactly what it says. You don't know what's going on. If I go into an interview and I'm the most and this happened to me, I went in and I knew I was the most qualified person because I knew the other candidate, and they basically called me. I left and they called me up and said, well, we're going to give the job to the other person. And I said, and I told them the person's name, and they were shocked that I knew the person. And I said, not only do I know the person, I know this person is nowhere near my level. And they actually got mad at me for knowing that information. So that's the kind of covert racism that, okay, you can't do anything about it. By the time you find out about it, it's too late. So I try to get people to understand we all do things that are, I'll give you an instance. When I first started working with the Hispanic students, and I got mad at a couple of students, I said, look me in the face when you talk to me. And it wasn't until one of them explained to me that that's being disrespectful in their culture, looking me straight in the eye, telling me, and I didn't have a clue. And so I learned a lot, but I had never been in a culture that was, I have a lot of friends that were Hispanic people growing up, but we all lived in a environment that was not Hispanic environment. When I'm out at a school like a Wilder, that's a Hispanic environment. Okay. When you got 90% of the students that are Hispanic, the town, everything, I had to learn to work in that culture. And I had to learn not to be a jerk about it. Okay. Here I am. I'm the PhD guy. You guys should listen to me. No, I wanted results. And the best story I tell about that is we were going on field trips and I noticed that the Hispanic girls weren't going. And at the time, I had done some reading, and it said the least educated students in America were Hispanic girls. And this concerned me. And so we had a guy coming in, and maybe you may have been there at this time, Dan. We brought in a guy, Luis Ibarra, and we went and had one of those things for employees where you get away, and we went to Sun Valley, and we did that in Sun Valley. I don't know if you were still there or not.
I don't
Anyway,
remember.
Luis came from Texas. He came from Texas, and I knew he was coming, and so I set it up to where he could come over to Wilder and talk to the parents about how important it is that they let the girls go on these field trips. And I paid out of my own pocket. I paid the janitor to come in on a Saturday. I got permission from the school district to use the gym, and we had food and everything. And so he gets there and he's talking, and they're talking in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish. And I just laughed when they laughed. Okay.
Mhm.
And so he did his thing. And then on the way home, he told me some of the stuff he talked about. That following week, several girls came up to me with their permission slip filled out. Their dad said it was okay. And my point is, I could have been like a lot of people I've seen. Well, if they're not going to listen to me, forget it. I'm not going to do anything about it. No, my goal was to get them on field trip. If I couldn't do it, I wanted to find somebody who could. And he was there. He happened to be coming in, and he was there, and he did it. And it turned the whole culture of that school around. And tons of girls have gone to college over the years. And so my point is that when you're dealing with racism, it may not be that overt racism, calling somebody your name or whatever the case may be. It may be something as subtle as, well, I'm the one who's going to help them. It's my job. Okay. Well, if I can't do it, then I have to be smart enough and willing enough to say, I need to find someone who can do it. Because the important thing is getting these students on the field trip, because Dan, you remember, once these kids go on the field trip, it lights them up.
Yeah, it
And they
does.
see students at these universities that look like them. And now we're on our way. And that was the goal. So anyway.
Good story. Um, what would you say is a cause of racism? Why do we have racists, whether they be overt or covert racists in society? Where does that come from? Is that a learned behavior? Is that something to do with social classes? What is your perspective on that?
Now, ask the first part again. I didn't get it. It sort of
I'm just
faded out.
thinking about the causes of racism. Uh, seems like racism's got to be a learned behavior. you don't automatically start out as a racism or as a racist, or am I missing that?
No, I talk about in the book, and I learned it from people. I used to work with a group called the People's Institute out of New Orleans, and they traveled the world doing anti-racism seminars. And one of the things I learned from them is that racism was done on purpose. Therefore, it has to be undone on purpose. We didn't accidentally fall into racism, and we're not going to accidentally fall out of racism. And so no, it's something learned. It's something that if you notice when times are really good and jobs are plentiful and everything's going good, we have a lull in racism. When things get bad, then all of a sudden the racism becomes the scapegoat. People, political people, whomever, when they want control over the masses, okay, it's all of a sudden here are the people who are causing you your turmoil in your life. Here's why you don't have this, and here's why, and these group of people right here are the reason why you don't have what you want in life. And for some reason, we keep falling for that okey doke. Okay, here in America, we keep falling for that, and it's never the truth. I saw a cartoon on Facebook, and I actually started sharing it, and it had three guys at a table, and they had these pile of cookies in front of them, and the older rich guy, rich white guy, he had a giant stack of cookies. Okay, a younger white guy, he had a really small stack of cookies, and the black guy sitting there, he had no cookies.
Mhm.
But the older white guy was telling the younger white guy, the reason you don't have as many cookies as I do is because of him, the guy who has no cookies.
Yeah,
And that doesn't, if you think about it, that doesn't even make any sense. But we fall for it every time. And it's like the people again out at Wilder where this country was going through, the Mexicans are taking all their job. Well, I drive to Wilder 3 times a week for 26 years, and I don't see anybody lining up out there picking the fruit that these Mexican people, that their
yeah,
job is picking the fruit, and I don't see anybody saying I want that job.
yeah,
Because a lot of the people who come from other countries, they don't start up at corporate jobs.
no, they don't.
I mean, most of them are not educated to the point to get those type of jobs. So you see manual labor and things like that. And so it's that's it's a difficult thing to explain until you look around and see it and talk about it and ask people straight out the questions, the hard questions. And that's a hard thing to do because a lot of times we don't want to accept, well, maybe I didn't get that job because I'm not qualified. It's like I had a kid one time, Hispanic kid. He was the star basketball player of the school, right? And they were undefeated. And it came around grade time, and his grades were horrible, and he was booted off the team, and the team lost like 3 games in a row. And so he was happened to be in one of my classes, and I asked him, what's going on with the basketball team? And they said, oh, man, we lost because so-and-so is ineligible. And so he was there, and I said, well, what happened? Well, my teacher gave me an F. And I go, really? So you're telling me you did A work, but that teacher gave you an F? Well, no. Oh, you're telling me you did B work and that teacher still gave you an F? No. And everybody in the class could see where I was going with this, except for him. He couldn't see where I was going. And so after I got to C work, I said, dude, teachers don't give Fs. You earn them. And you let your team down. For the second year in a row, you let your team down by getting bad grades. The teacher don't give you, I guarantee you, if you show me you did A work and the teacher gave you an F, I'll go with you to the school district. It doesn't happen like that.
Mhm.
And it was a hard lesson for him to learn. And it's the same way in society. It's a hard lesson for us to learn that maybe some of our problems aren't caused by the people who are more accessible to being our scapegoat. Maybe some of our problems have to do with the choices we did or did not make. And so I hope that sort of answered your question. It's always on purpose. It's never um, racism is done, and it was done on purpose. It has to be undone on purpose. I
As
don't know
an,
if that makes sense to you.
yeah, as an old sociology teacher and political science teacher, one of the things I observed is that in societies like the United States, it's a class-based system. We have very rich people and very poor people. And one of the ways in which the rich people continue to stay rich is to keep the poor people poor. And I think that's sometimes where you get racism as a function of that. It's the example you gave of the black guy that had no cookies at the table in the Far Side cartoon. That's a perfect example of that. Glenda, do you want to jump in here? Well,
I, um, I probably do. I'm just trying to think where I wanted to jump in. Yeah, I do. I know what I wanted to ask you. When I was reading some of actually just the website in the beginning, you were talking about 10 beliefs, and then you also gave a definition of anti-racist, going from racist to non-racist to anti-racist. And I was reading your definition and was looking at it very carefully and thought, and I took each part of it and I'm thinking, well, I would have called that non-racist and I would have called that non-racist. And so I'm thinking I'm missing something. So could you share with me how you get from non-racist to racist or anti-racist? What's the real difference there between those two?
Okay, take it as this. Let's say you're walking down that back alley and you see a guy and the guy is getting beat up. And you're yelling and screaming, I'm nonviolent. But the guy's still getting beat up. And you walk on by. Okay. Versus seeing that and saying, I'm anti-violent. I'll stop violence when I see it. So I'm either gonna, if I think I'm tough enough, I'm gonna jump in and help just and stop the fight, or I'm gonna tell that person, I'm calling the police right now. I'm taking pictures of you. You need to stop this. There's a difference between non-violent, non-violent and anti-violent. There's a difference between non-racist and we see race. I'll give you a perfect story. This happened to me over on Broadway Street, where there used to be a Rexall pharmacy over on Broadway in Boise. And this is a true story. I walk in, it's after 5, and I work down at the bank, so I'm in here, and I'm trying to, just like everybody else, trying to get something and hurry home from work. And the lady in the Rexall behind the counter just basically ignored me. And in walks this white woman, very nicely dressed, professional. She smiled, said hi to me and stuff like that. Went and got her stuff, and I went and got my stuff. And we somehow ended up at the counter at the same time. And actually, I ended up there about 10, 15 seconds before her. And she came up and said hi again. And the lady had been ignoring me behind the counter. And she turned around and she went to the woman. Now, that woman didn't do anything wrong. Okay. She could have just accepted that, got her stuff, paid for it, and left. And she looked this cashier in the face and said, he was here first. And I turned to her and I said, thank you. And because I can, and it's like I tell my students who, and then you've been in the classroom, you know this, for some reason, students think that if they pass a note behind them, that as a teacher up front, you can't see it. Okay. like I would tell, I see you passing the note, okay, and they're almost like they're surprised. Well, when it comes to racism for a lot of people, just like when it comes to sexism for a lot of women, they know when it's happening, even when other people around them don't know when it's happening. And so I knew what this lady behind the counter, I knew what she was doing. And I was happily surprised that the woman who came up knew it too. And her deal was, no, he was here first. So that's how we do it. When we see it happening or we suspect it's happening, we do something about it, not just say, I would never do that. Okay. Is that
Yeah, it does. And you're starting to clarify because that's what I was thinking it would be if I were to give the definition. But there were a couple of examples that I think came up and I was confused because there was one, because I read the part about what happened in that store that you were
okay?
talking about. And but then I read something about one of your beliefs and it said something about walkers versus talkers. And you were talking about the person that had a cup that had I'm not racist on it, or a t-shirt that says not racist or something like that. And it made me think that those were walkers, not talkers. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, well, how do you know that this person's just sitting there with a mug? But if they're saying that that's the way they are, you won't know until something comes up for them to open their mouth and say that, like what you're saying, step up and say that's not acceptable, because needless to say, when you, like yourself, when you work in an environment where you have a mix of people, it's going to happen. And a
Mhm.
teacher has to step up and open their mouth and say these things are not acceptable. But that doesn't mean that I'm out there shouting it all the time or talking about it. It's
Now,
just,
are you talking about not talking about the anti-racism that you do, or the anti-racism that you recognize?
well, you were talking about moving from non-racism to anti-racism, and I'm having trouble figuring out what non-racism versus anti-racism actually, what is the difference of the two
And
versus
that's,
being racist. Racist is pretty out there. I mean, you just know that they're racist, but
well,
what's a
the difference of
non-racist?
a non-racist is a person who doesn't, they're not racist, but they don't do anything to stop it. Okay,
Okay, so they'll just walk on past,
they'll
is
just
what you're
walk up
saying.
past that person in the alley, get in fight. They may even say, "I'm a non-violent person." Okay, well, does that help the person getting beat up in the alley?
Right.
No.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
versus the anti-violent person who says, when I see violence, I stop it the best I can, or if I see racism, I stop it the best I can. Okay, there are people who see racism all the time and do nothing, and they may not be racist themselves, but they don't do
Interesting.
anything
Because
to
to me, they
stop it.
are. So you do
Okay,
nothing to me,
and
and that's
see,
just it. I would have classified them as non-racist. Okay, now I understand.
okay, but see, that's why we have to have, to me, the classification, because those, there are more of those than there are the racists. And if
I agree.
we start offending people, you hear them say it all the time, I'm not racist, I'm not racist. And my answer is, yeah, but you aren't anti-racist either.
Mhm.
You're not stopping racism when you see it. And so I know I'm not calling you a racist. I'm calling you a non-racist individual. And a non-racist is a person who doesn't believe in racism, but I'm not going to do anything to stop it either.
So one,
And they
one,
may not be conscious of that. They're not conscious of that. It's not like they walk around saying it. It's just they don't realize, okay, they think if I don't do it, then I'm not part of the problem. No, because if racism is done on purpose, it has to be undone on purpose. And the only way it can be undone is if we recognize it and we undo it.
Agree.
Okay. And so that's what I mean by moving from a non-racist person. A non-racist person is not gonna help fix the problem. They may
Thank you
not
for the
cause the
clarification.
problem. Okay, they may not cause the problem, but they're not going to help fix the problem. We are at that stage where we need people who say, I want to fix this problem. I don't want to just recognize it. I don't want to point at other people and say they're doing this. I want to be that person that undoes racism in my life, in my own personal life, not try to take off a chunk that you're trying to cure the world. That's too big. Okay, not everybody is meant to be Martin Luther King or anybody like that. Some of us are just Rosa Parks. No, I'm not gonna sit in the back. I'm
Mhm.
not gonna, or I'm gonna support things. And speaking of Rosa Parks, I just found out that is it Chicago Pizza Pizza Pizza? Is that the name of that brand? That's their slogan, Pizza Pizza, and it has
Oh,
the or Caesar's Pizza. Or what is
it, I think it's Caesar's, Little Caesar's.
Okay. Well, the owner of that, he also owns, I think, a Major League Baseball team, or he did. He passed away. But I found out that that guy, Rosa Parks, got robbed one time, and he found out about it, and he got her apartment and paid for it for the rest of her life.
Wow.
And so, where do you think I get my pizzas now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to support somebody who supports me. We need that kind of thing going on because to me, for lack of a better term, the enemy is doing that. Okay, so we need to do it. So I'm going to support people who are anti-racist. I'm going to support people who are showing me that they're trying to do something about racism, not just people who just talk about it. So I hope I explained it. I
Yeah.
don't know if
I,
I
I
did.
I now understand how you're looking at it. I got it.
One of
And
the
I agree
things,
with you, more in that middle field.
yeah, one of the things I wanted to
Thank you.
interject here, and I'm thinking about this from a political science standpoint, and it's not that I disagree with you, Keith, but I see this as a challenge in moving from a non-racist to an anti-racist kind of a perspective. So there's something in political science called the political involvement continuum. And so you start about, like, how are you involved in politics? And at one level, there's you vote. That's pretty a basic kind of a thing to do. And uh then that kind of gets more complicated by people start giving money to politicians. And then at the other end of the spectrum, people actually run for office. Most people are not in that category where they're going to run for office. So that seems to be a
Hmm.
problem with moving from being a non-racist to an anti-racist because a lot of people aren't very active. And you still there? You still
Okay.
there?
Are you
Glenn?
back, Dan?
Yeah, for some reason, here's the problem with doing Zoom. It cuts out. So did I make that clear? People's lack of social involvement makes it difficult for some, not saying all, but for some people to move from being a uh, non-racist to an anti-racist. What do you do about that?
well, that just depends. It's like um, my youngest son Nathan. He was up at the University of Oregon, and he was home for Christmas. And it was so cool for me to see all of these guys that used to run through my house when they were little, now all young men, okay, 24, 25 years old. And they were talking about how, and most of them were white. There's a couple Hispanic guys and Asian guys, and they all basically lived here. Okay. And they talked about that, how I made them feel welcome. Okay. So not everything about going from non-racist to anti-racist is, like I said before, not everybody is meant to be Martin Luther King. Maybe you're meant to volunteer someplace. Maybe it's just about when you have somebody at your house, your kids' friends or your own friends, or making your house look like someplace where my kids grew up seeing all different colors of people come through our house. Okay, they saw me hanging out with all different kinds of people. Okay, I don't even think I have another PhD friend. So I'm even talking about, I wasn't acting like, oh, I'm a PhD, so I only hang out with PhDs. I'm Black, I only hang out with Black folks. No, my kids saw everybody. So my point is, it's not all about having, like in politics, having to run for office. You can volunteer and help the person running for office. You can donate a few bucks to the person running for office. And it's the same way from nonviolent or non-racist to anti-racist. I'm going to make my home, I'm going to make whatever I do, let people know that I don't tolerate racism. And no, maybe I'm not going to go out there. I went to graduate school, Utah State graduate school, on a Martin Luther King Fellowship Award. A white, I think he was Mormon guy, marched with Martin Luther King. And when I guess he got rich and he set up this scholarship, this fellowship. And that's how I went to graduate school the first time I went to graduate school, on the Martin Luther King Fellowship Award by a white guy in Salt Lake City or Logan. I don't know if he lived at Utah State or in Logan, where Utah State is, but that's what he decided to do. Okay, I don't know if he did anything else. By the time I got the scholarship, I think the guy had passed away. But my point is, it's not about having to do this big, gigantic thing to prove you're anti-racist. It could be small. One of my best buddies, he lives in Reno. He's white. We went to high school together. And when I was this football player, and we were at his house one day, and I was talking about how I was going to make all conference, all city. And he bet me $20. His dad bet me $20 that I wouldn't make all. So I made it. And I remember the day we were over there, and I was there to collect my $20, and he gave it to me with a smile. And when we left, my buddy, he said, "You know what he did?" I go, "I know what he did." And to the day his dad died, I appreciated that with him, and I told him so. And one of the when his dad died, he called me up and told me. He said, "Keith, when I walked in and found him, he had already died, but guess whose CD he was playing?" I had done a Nat King Cole CD, and he was listening to my CD, and so Mr. Davis wasn't out there waving flags. He wasn't out there, but he made his home someplace that I never, ever felt anything other than equal. That's what we can do. It's not about everybody trying to become Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, whomever, okay? It's not about that, because most people aren't going to be that. But if you really care, you can make your own personal life your, I can't even come up with a word, but what you do to make the world a better place. So did that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, did. Glenda, do you have something else you want to chime in with, or?
I think I'm good.
Okay, you're good. So, and this will take the conversation back a little bit, but I was wondering about this because you wrote about that. I was thinking about the racist influences in our society, and you talked about the racist influence in education at the elementary school, the middle school level, and high school, and you also talked about racist influence in religion. I found those, as a sociology guy, I found those kind of interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Well, as far as education is concerned, and we're going through this right now with this um, critical race theory,
Right.
which I've been in schools for 26 years around here, and I haven't seen one teacher teaching it. Okay, and so it's not this ghost that's going to do so much harm to America's kids, because it's really not being taught to kids. It's a college subject, okay, and so it's just not. It's not true. But it's like, for myself and people I know who, uh, in the field of education, when I did my dissertation on teacher communication with students from diverse backgrounds, I learned about the fact that the educational system that most teachers would tell you, I was not prepared to teach a mixed race classroom, especially here in Idaho. And I interviewed a lot of teachers for my study about their teacher preparation, getting ready. They said, "Oh, I thought it was a great job, the training and training until I got into a classroom." And see, Idaho, I remember going to talk to the people at the Department of Ed here at near the Capitol, and I was telling them that Idaho, the fabric of the students in Idaho, the race of the students in Idaho are changing. And this is no lie. I told them right now we're averaging double figures in percentage of kids of different ethnic groups and race in classrooms in Idaho. The person looked me in the face and said, "Where did you get that statistic?" I said, "From your website." And they're like, "Huh?" Yeah, here's, and I had printed off the page. Yeah, see, there's your website down at the bottom. You know this is happening, but you really don't know. And so you're talking about the field of education. I don't think there's very many teachers sitting there saying, "I don't want to teach students of color." I don't believe that at all.
No.
I believe there are universities that are at Boise State University. You could take weaving Persian rugs, and that goes as an intercultural class.
Hmm.
Okay, and so they've made it so wide that you get all those credits that you're supposed to get that have to do with culture, but they're not necessarily students. And so, and this is not just with Boise State. When I was doing my research, this was all over the country that this was happening, where teachers did not feel prepared to teach racially mixed classrooms. And especially if they were in a classroom, they got into a school where you're talking 40, 50% of the students are from a different race than they are. Okay. So it permeates in the system, systemic racism. I mean, that's what it means. And so we in almost every system that functions in the United States, you can find it. It's there, and it's always been there. And now we just have that. America now, the racists in America now have that boldness to just throw it out front. I'm going to just stop teaching. No more AP African American history.
Right.
And you just going, what? And they get away with it. And so it's yeah, I mean, I don't even want to get into it to the point where I just get angry, because it's so silly and it's setting us back. And that's why it's one of the things I talk about when I do studies, is that people don't understand racism hurts us all. I do this thing in my seminars where I ask people, and I use colors, and I know sometimes that sort of ticks people off, but I said, for this exercise, let's just use colors, okay? And I said, I want all white people to write down 10 things they like about being white. All black people write down 10 things you like about being black, brown, red, yellow people. Write all these things down, 10 of them. And so I give them 5 or 10 minutes to do that. And then I said, okay, white folks, give me your list. And we write them on the board. Black folks, give me your list. And we write them on the board. And we do that with everybody's list, okay? And I just stand there for a minute and I tell them, look at the list. And they look at the list, and it only takes about another 30 seconds before somebody says, whoa, everything on our list, white people list, is what we get for being white.
Hmm.
I don't get followed in the stores. I don't get stopped by cops as much. I don't this, I don't that. Whereas the black, brown, red, yellow people, culture, food, dance, music, all of these things. And I say, now, what is the lesson here? You gave up being Irish to be white. You gave up being Italian to be white. You gave up being Polish or German or whatever your culture is, where you really came from, to be this thing called white. Because in America, white has its privileges. So you stop, and one lady raised her hand. I remember this one time. She goes, yeah, 6 months ago, I was Bosnian. And we changed our name so that it sounds more American. All these things. And so the lesson for that is we all lose. And I had, in the last one I did, I had this guy, red beard, red hair, and he raised his hand. He said, Dr. Anderson, I just came back from Ireland for that very reason. Because I had lost my Irish identity. And so people don't think of it like that.
No,
Okay, they don't think of, yeah, it's one of my best friends to this day. We were friends since seventh grade. Paul Scola, Italian family. His family was pretty wealthy. They owned an electric company, and I pretty much lived there growing up. And we were into music. He's a hell of a guitar player to this day. I was a bass player. And we would just be playing music all day, all the time. And I remember when I became a football player and I was in the paper all the time, his parents were so proud of me. Okay. And, but I learned to this day, I eat hard salami that come in that red, white, green package. My love of pistachios. His mom used to bring us back then. They were red and white pistachios, and they would get all over your finger, the dye on the seeds. And spaghetti, all this stuff that I eat to this day was because of them being proud of being Italian. And I had no problem with it, and they had no problem showing me. And so we have lost that, and we'll have groups of people out fighting and being racist, and all of them they just put themselves under one umbrella, and they pretty much have lost themselves. And I loved when that guy from Ireland, I said, tell us a little bit about your experience. And he says, I just found out some stuff that I never knew, and I'm proud to be Irish. And I find nothing wrong with that. And so that's what we've lost. So everybody loses in racism. They only want you to see monetary loss or something like that. But if you look at it like, well, who am I? And a lot of people have lost their identity. So anyway.
Yeah, Glenda and I have discussions about, regardless of skin tone or national origin, that we're all basically human. And that's the commonality that we should focus on. But sometimes it's easier not to do that. I want to be.
But it's also cool. It's also cool the differences. I love having Hispanic friends. I go and I would eat Mexican food at their house when I go there, and Italian friends and my own family eating soul food and all this stuff. I mean, that's how I grew up, where there were different. It was okay. It was an okay thing, and all of a sudden, it's not okay, you know. And so, yeah, I think we should celebrate our differences. I think our differences is what makes us unique. And we should be able to all be proud of who we are and share who we are. Okay? And I mean, there's just so much richness there. There's so much richness in the fact that there's so many different kinds of people in this country. And instead of trying to make one group better and more superior than the other, to me, it seems like being able to share each other's food, dance, music, whatever, to me, seems it makes us a better, makes it a better place to live.
I think we could agree with that. I want to be cognizant of time. We've been on this podcast over an hour. You might have something to do beside talk with Glenda and I tonight, Keith. So, do you have, Glenda? Do you have any final thoughts you want to, or questions for Keith before we wrap this up?
I don't know, what Keith just said in terms of, reaching out with all ethnicities, and I'm 150% on board with that, as you well know, with my, association with my friends in the world at this moment, like Ukraine. I find one thing I just wanted to add, and I think probably Keith, you would agree with me with this. I think it's just as important not only to honor the other tradition, but sometimes I think it's important that we reach out to them too. Do you know what I mean? Instead of saying, I'm English, so you have to speak English and you have to speak it my way, is to try to reach out to their custom or their way and speak in their way. In other words, I think that gets us past that non-racist to more anti-racist, where we start to actually say, we're here for you. And maybe it's as much as just the conversation over a dinner table of different foods, but reaching out to the culture, not just your own mixed into it. I don't know.
I think you're 100% correct that reaching out, becoming part of other people's, learning other people's culture, it's learning about how other people do life, and not to judge them, not to say, oh, your way is wrong and my way is right, just to understand it and respect
Exactly.
that person's or that group of people's way of thinking and doing things. And it's like when I go talk out in I'll just say the boonies, when I'm talking to ranchers and farmers, I talk about yields, okay? They know what that is. I had to learn that from them, but they understand when I tell them, I'll tell them, you won't plant a seed and stand there and watch it grow. They know what that means. And I know what that means. I now come into their world and say, I understand what you do, and I'm going to use what you do to make a point. It would be ridiculous for me to think that you stand there, you plant a seed, and you stay there and watch it grow. Like I say, sometimes we have to plant our seeds as educators. We don't get to see it grow.
Right.
We just trust that we planted that seed well enough, and maybe one day, sometimes we do get that. Every once in a while, we get to see that student years later, and we go, "Wow." Okay,
Absolutely.
and that's the reward. But it doesn't happen a lot. But when I talk to farmers, I tell them, "Yeah, you don't stand there and watch that seed grow, do you?" And they know what I mean. And so I've had to learn, being here in Idaho, not only about who I am. I was forced to learn who I am because I can't hide in Idaho. Okay, I cannot hide. I'm 6'1", 300-pound black guy. I ain't hiding nowhere. So I had to come to terms with my blackness, which allowed me to come to terms with everybody else. And to me, that's my secret. That's what I do. That's how I do it. Is I give everybody else their respect, and then here's what I need for my respect. And sometimes we have to tell people. We just assume that people know what we want, and that's not true. Sometimes you got to tell people. So anyway, that's all I have to say, I guess.
Thank you.
Keith, I want to
Thanks, guys.
thank
I appreciate it.
I want to thank you for being on our show. I think our people listening to this podcast will be educated, which is the whole purpose of this. Would you come back sometime? Come back and
Oh yeah, yeah.
maybe
And sometimes we can talk about some other interesting stuff, because I don't know if Dad told you, I've been UFO person for a long time.
well,
So
just
yeah.
just along those same lines, did you have any contact with MUFON there in Boise?
No, I never did find out who is the state MUFON person to talk to. And I
Yeah.
couldn't find your Facebook today either.
Really? Under Daniel Hall. That's all I would look for.
You know how many Daniel Halls there are on Facebook?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably too many. Probably
Yeah.
one's
And I
enough.
so I couldn't find so send me a link or something.
Okay, all right. But Keith, we'll have you back. We'll talk MUFON or whatever you want to talk. But thanks for reconnecting with me, and thanks for agreeing to be on the podcast. And hope you have luck with doing your own podcast.
I'll probably be bugging you for some advice, and I appreciate you guys having me on. And it was nice meeting you. And yeah, so
This will take a
cool.
week or so to get on the YouTube channel, but when it's edited and put on the YouTube channel, we'll send you a link.
Cool.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks, Keith. It was a delight meeting you.
Yeah,
You
Glenda,
too. Thanks a lot for the questions.
thanks
I
for
love
being
them.
on with us too, Glenda. I appreciate that. All right. Well, I'm going to say good night to everybody.
Okay. See you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.